evening, and welcome to Beware of Spoilers. I am Adam. This is going to be a brief one, I'm going to be completely honest with you, because I think the problem that I run into is that when a movie is really good, I don't have a ton to talk about with it, because it's easy to nitpick. It's easy to look at a movie that's shitty and be like, okay, well, this movie doesn't work because of X, Y, and Z, and here's what they could have done to X, Y, and Z to make the movie flow a little bit better. It's easy to do that when the movie's bad. When the movie's good, there's nothing to point out and be like, oh, it's shitty. It's just the movie's good, the acting's great, the effects are cool, and all of that. Now, with All Quiet on the Western Front, we do have a history behind it. Excuse me. Of like other things regarding this book. Whereas like the book is almost 100 years old now. And on a personal note, when I read this book in high school, it was my favorite of the assigned reading books. Like I read this, I read Catcher in the Rye, Fahrenheit 451. I'm not going to get into the full list of every fucking book I read in high school, but this was one of the books that was on my list, and when I read it the first time, instantly it was my favorite. And then nothing has, no book that I had to read to the subject has unseated it. Maybe some Kafka got close when I read some Kafka in college. But what we're here to talk about is we're talking about the, I really like the Metamorphosis. But what this is it is a book about, it's not pro-war, it's, anti-war. Now the author said it's not pro-war or anti-war, it just is a representation of reality, which is accurate, but at the same time, you can't portray war accurately and have it portrayed as a positive. It just doesn't work that way. So when you look at this book, it's this story of how nationalism causes people to blindly go to war when they shouldn't have to, and how that nationalism doesn't exactly track well over, and what happens when that nationalism doesn't blend with reality in a neat way, because the ideal version of the country and the geopolitical situation doesn't match reality. So how do they mesh? How do they slide together? And all of that. Plus, I remember reading it and just being struck by post-traumatic stress. We knew post-traumatic stress was a thing going back to, back here. We didn't call it post-traumatic stress, but it was still something that, soldiers were aware of. They called it shell shock. And it is one of those things that, as you watch this movie and as you see the lessons that it's trying to impart, we're 100 years later. And I've said this before when I talked about the Roaring Twenties as a movie. That is, anytime someone asks me the question, if you could remake one movie now, what would it be? My answer is always the Roaring Twenties with James Cagney. Because the thing about it is as real now. The issues with veterans, the issues with how we treat veterans once they come home from war, the way the legal system casts people aside, and the way that the obstacles that are faced by people who are who have a criminal offense, all of that kind of stuff is as accurate now as it was almost 100 years ago, or over 100. No, it was almost 100 years ago, because I get back in World War I. This movie, I think it's the 30s. So all that stuff is as accurate today as it was back then. The same goes for All Quiet on the Western Front. I keep calling it All's Quiet on the Western Front because I think my head is dramatically changing it. All Quiet on the Western Front, it's the same thing, where these issues are still just as relevant now as they were way back then. Which is honestly a little terrifying. So you got the national, and it's just it is and I think one of the things that was really striking about this movie that I saw a few critics actually criticized it for this, but I could not be further in the opposite direction on this, where the critics were calling it out, saying that the issue is the movie's a little chaotic, and when you watch the movie, this guy next to me, I'm driving home, and before we get into this too much further, this guy next to me, I'm driving home. If you've ever seen the episode of The King of Queens, where they need a new car. So Arthur decides to buy them this little European go-kart looking thing. It's a European thing where like the steering wheel's on the wrong side and all of that. This guy next to me is driving that fucking car, and I'm like, why the fuck would you drive? Anyway, so it's the chaos and all of that, and it's like, I think that is to great effect within the movie. I mean, the issue is that, like, one of the things the book portrays is that war is not the glamorous thing that it is made out to be by recruiters and by all of that. And considering we still have this problem now, where it's like right now a contender for Best Picture, I think it is one of those things that, like, it's really interesting to think about that we have two movies up for Best Picture that are contradictory, almost specifically in message, where by and large Top Gun Maverick is a recruitment tool for the military. It is a Navy recruitment video. Like the original Top Gun, they put that movie out and they had, Navy recruiters on site to sign people up for the Navy as they're walking out of the theater. Like, that is very specifically by design, to make the American military look good. It's propaganda. It's militaristic propaganda, which, alright, whatever, it is what it is. So you have that going on, and then to have this other movie that is like, well, no, that's not what war is. War is not this realistic thing. I think it's an interesting kind of juxtaposition between the two. And it is the kind of thing where it's like, and then when you get these chaotic scenes of like what it actually is like in the trenches and in these terrible situations, it does create these interesting moments, especially when the chaos is amped up as much as it is in the movie. And I think that's part of what makes it really work very well, is this, because in the book they kind of portray it as chaotic, and if you're going to portray it as chaotic in the movie, use the visuals and the sound, use the medium to amp that up and make the audience really feel how terrifying the situation is, and I think the movie does it very well. The movie is in German and partially in French, so you will need subtitles unless you speak German or French natively, which I'm not saying it's not possible. It's just I don't think a sizable contingent of our listening audience hails from Germany or France. So if you watch it on Netflix, which is where it is, it's a Netflix original movie, you will need a subtitle on there, which is, good for immersion, because it feels like you're watching the story realistically unfold, and I think that's one of the real great things about this movie. But I think that just about covers everything I wanted to touch on with this movie. Again, we get into this problem where the movie is too good to really talk at length about, where it's like, I talked longer about last week's episode of The Flash because it pissed me off so much, but if the movie's good, nothing we can do about that. Well, I mean, not that there's anything we should do about that, but there's just very little to actually do besides, I mean, everyone's great in the movie, and visually it is fantastic, and, thematically it resonates, so I think that, the movie's just great. So if you have Netflix, check it out on streaming. It's, available with your subscription. But we'll wrap up there for today. So this week we also have the new episode of Mandalorian. We have the new episode of The Bad Batch. We have continuing The Flash. We have continuing The Last of Us. We have, and in terms of movies, we have Creed 3 on Wednesday, and we have another one, Operation Fortune, Ruse de Guerre, or something like that. I don't know how to pronounce French words. And that will be on Thursday. Over on 30-Minute Reviews, we're going to be talking about today's Pokemon Presents and the impending Pokemon DLC, and how I overhyped myself for this Pokemon Presents that was ultimately not what I was hoping it would be. So we'll be nursing my disappointment tomorrow over there, as well as talking about Creed and Creed 2. And we'll be talking about, what was the other thing? On Exploring Hyperspace Lanes. We're going to talk about how I made an ass of myself in ShopRite, and Josie thinks I'm an asshole for it. Well, you'll hear it. And we'll also be talking about, We'll also be talking about the book Dooku Jedi Lost, or the audio book Dooku Jedi Lost. But we'll wrap up there for today. Go to multipleworldsproductions.com. You can see the blog posts about all the episodes we do. You can see the information about where you can support the show and all of that. And until our next episode, have a great rest of your week.